Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
New releases that we'll be talking about this week include The Lego Movie and Labor Day. Our top 10 is a holdover from last week that we delayed so we could pay tribute to Philip Seymour Hoffman. So we'll be counting down this week our favorite Oscar-nominated Best Original Songs of all time. We also have our triple feature to close the show, and this week that includes Short Term 12, listener-picked Wings of Desire, and the 1966 version of Alfie for our Oscar A to Z. First, though, more casting news was recently announced for the Man of Steel sequel, and if people had a problem with Ben Affleck being cast as Batman, and as you know they did, see how this one grabs you. Jesse Eisenberg from The Social Network and Now You See Me has been cast as Lex Luthor. And, of course, we go to Joe first.
Well,
when I told you about this the other day, you were like... I think punching things.
I think I had like a moment of shock. I really couldn't believe it. It took a few seconds to really sink in. There are two ways to look at this. I guess it's possible that maybe the people casting this movie are just picking some hidden gems. I'm gonna say it's possible. Then I'm gonna say that's not really what's happening. But I'm just gonna at least put that possibility out there. I'm not saying that these actors, most of them, the ones that I know, I don't think any of them are bad. It's just that so far, I feel like they're all horribly miscast, and I think Justin put it a good way. It's possible that the Justice League movie might go down in history as one of the worst miscast movies of all time, because Ben Affleck...
seems to be shaping up that way.
Ben Affleck was questionable. People were kind of on the fence about him, but it's not really that positive. Jesse Eisenberg, though, the rumors of Bryan Cranston being Lex Luthor were just awesome. Like, he would have been perfect. I mean, I thought that was kind of obvious. I think he even said he would do it, but... obviously, they're going with Jesse Eisenberg, who I don't think is really, once again, a bad actor per se, but I really, really don't see him playing the older, intimidating, mad scientist billionaire Lex Luthor. I just really don't picture Jesse Eisenberg being able to carry Lex Luthor, his presence, and also the fact that the age gap between him and Affleck and Cavill is, I think, significant.
That also struck me as odd, yeah.
Because, as from what I understand, I mean... Batman is normally in his 40s somewhere, which I guess Ben Affleck is, correct? Right. Though I believe he's supposed to be playing an even older Batman, which is a bit odd.
Which bothered me.
Which is weird. Yeah, I agree. And then they have Henry Cavill, who's in his 30s, which is how Superman generally looks. And then you got Lex Luthor, who's usually somewhere around Superman or Batman's age. So, considering the fact that they're not all syncing up in age groups based on cast members, Eisenberg just looks really, really young.
Yeah.
He looks really young.
He is really young.
I'm hopeful, but I really, really don't think it's going to be that great.
I was not a full-on detractor of the Affleck thing. I thought, all right, it's a weird choice, but I like Ben Affleck. Let's see how it plays out. But this just doesn't make any sense. And Jesse Eisenberg pretty much is the same in all of his movies.
From what I've seen.
He's kind of like the smart ass,
quirky,
like
nice guy,
nerd. Like Lex Luthor is evil. He's not like a wise guy, like that's what's not syncing up for me other than the age thing.
He's usually pretty straightforward. Like,
right.
This
like Spacey was...
He's like, exactly.
Amazing.
Spacey was a great pick.
This is who I am. This is what I want.
Returns.
He was easily probably the best part about Superman Returns, to be honest.
We all know that. I just don't... kind of like with Affleck, I don't feel that he's that intimidating.
Right.
Which is a big part of these characters.
When we talked about the whole Affleck thing, I even said, like, look, let's wait and see. Like, let's not, kill it before we've seen anything. But...
Why?
It just doesn't make any sense. Like, at least Affleck, age-wise, kind of lines up. He can do a few different things. Eisenberg he's too young. He does the same thing every day. It would be like casting Eisenberg in Lincoln. It's just, no. Like, why would you do it?
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Justin, any extra thoughts?
Let me start off by saying I do not think that Eisenberg is a bad actor. I enjoyed Social Network. I thought it was okay. Now You See Me. My biggest issue with it is one that is a point that Joe mentioned, and that's the fact that he's way too young for the role. And I'll be honest, based on the roles that he's given us thus far, he just can't pull off that kind of menace. And it's a shame because as we talked about, Bryan Cranston was the dynamite choice. I don't understand why nobody was like trying to do petitions trying to get him on board for this.
I'd say he was too busy with Godzilla, but we know that's over. You know,
And not
Yes, we
only
do.
that, but super popular right now.
Exactly.
You know, Breaking Bad's last season was huge. It's over now. He's in demand. Why not? Like, what is the problem?
Yeah.
I think that DC, I don't know, they just have some weird marketing choices. It's true in their comics, it's true in their movies. I don't know what they're thinking. And actually, I know we didn't really discuss it before, but I guess since we're talking about it now, we might as well. As far as casting choices go, we know Wonder Woman's going to be in the movie, and I don't know about this actress. I think you guys might. What's her name? Gal Gadot. She's going to be Wonder Woman. I don't know anything about her. I know she was like an Israeli actress or something, and I don't know if she's any good. I don't know anything about her.
She didn't really have a whole lot to do in Fast and the Furious, so
it's kind of all bets are off.
It's definitely a wild card.
Oh, I know her from Date Night.
Date Night.
I mean, I've seen a bunch of stuff she's been in. I saw Night and Day also. I don't remember her from it, but
it's just that.
Yeah, I mean, I know who she is, but I don't know her enough to say whether she'd be a good Wonder Woman.
Like, people really
Neither.
don't know much about her, so I guess that's why there wasn't as much of a buzz. Mostly she's just really skinny, and Wonder Woman's kind of buff was like the big issue. I don't know. But that was another odd casting choice. I felt like there were 10 other highly competent women they could have chosen to play Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
You know, one of the big DC characters. So
do you think that if the second Man of Steel movie comes out, and obviously it's going to do well, but if the reaction to certain characters or cast members is super negative, do you think that they would recast for the Justice League movie?
You know what? I would like them to be more consistent, but even Marvel's had to do that before in little roles.
Yeah.
I would imagine DC would probably do that because...
Well, we've seen a different Hulk every time, too.
Exactly.
With Marvel.
That was one, and they managed to kind of work that in well. Hopefully they'll have Mark Ruffalo in his own movie. It kind of needs to happen. Everybody knows that.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I think that, yeah, obviously it's going to do well. They know that, and I think no matter what the critical reaction is going to be, people are going to see this movie. It's got to be big.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't do well, I think, in the critical mindset, it'll probably do well enough that they will do the Justice League movie and hopefully learn from their mistakes. The Justice League movie is going to obviously have at least 7 big characters, that, you know, and they're going to obviously have a couple actors that haven't been chosen yet. So they're still open for that. And if, for instance, this Godot woman, maybe she doesn't do well, she's a nobody, they can write her off with somebody better. No one will probably care. You know, because I feel like the continuity of this might be a little weird. I'm not really sure, but I think they've got their Superman.
Right.
And that's
and he did a great job in Man of Steel.
And the thing about Jesse Eisenberg is, even if they don't like him as Lex Luthor that much, he probably won't be in the Justice League movie because they'll have some bigger threat, something fans want to see, like Brainiac.
That's true. He's not necessarily integral
he's
to
a
that story.
Superman villain, yes, but I mean, they
Right.
want to see somebody like Brainiac, Darkseid, somebody we haven't seen on screen before. I mean, I would hope, if they don't hate their fans, which sometimes I think they do.
Well, speaking of Batman and Superman, our first movie up is the Lego Movie, which features both of those characters in Lego form. And this opened at a huge #1 this weekend at the box office with more than $60 million. And Joe's going to tell us about the Lego Movie.
The Lego Movie is an animated comedy directed and written by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and based on the Lego toy line. The film stars Chris Pratt, Will Ferrell, Elizabeth Banks, Will Arnett, Liam Neeson, and Morgan Freeman, among many others. In the fantastical multiverse of the Lego worlds, a new threat has arisen. The evil dystopian ruler Lord Business, voiced by Will Ferrell, has stolen the Kraggle, a device which could threaten to destroy any sense of creativity and free will and hold everything in place, because it's really a container of crazy glue. The wizard Vitruvius, voiced by Morgan Freeman, tells Business of a prophecy of a Lego man known as the Special, who is destined to defeat him. 8.5 years later, we find that Emmett Brickowski, voiced by Chris Pratt, is an everyday construction worker who cheerfully tries to fit in, but everyone thinks is too bland and has no special qualities. However, his simple life is interrupted when he runs into a girl named Wildstyle, who is searching for a mysterious relic, the piece of resistance which can counteract the Kraggle's destructive power. This special piece is attached to Emmett, and the race is on for him to save the world and learn to become a master builder. He is pursued by a businessman's henchman Bad Cop, a policeman with a split personality, voiced by Liam Neeson, and as the team explores the worlds of Lego, they are allied by many visitors from other franchises, most notably being Batman himself, voiced by Will Arnett. This movie was everything I hoped it would be and more. Not only is it a visual treat filled with lots of eye candy and impressive animation, it has a superb voice cast and some very surprisingly clever writing. I thought at best this would be fun, but I was mostly amazed by how smart the writing was. The main story has a simple but important message for anyone of all ages. That being that everyone has the capability to do something creative and beneficial if they put their mind to it. However, it is the humor that's the real treat here. There are so many jokes for adults, ranging from commentaries on social norms and standards, to spoofs on movie tropes like over-the-top action and slow motion, to meta-humor about the story and plenty of in-jokes about geek fandom as well, including little jokes from DC Comics fans, Star Wars fans, Lord of the Rings fans, Harry Potter fans, and even more so importantly, LEGO fans in general. The film also does something clever and rather profound in the third act that seemed like a surprisingly deep and thought-provoking move for a kids' movie. The only real negative to it I can think of is that the change I spoke of in the third act is a bit off-putting at first, and I do think it almost takes us out of the movie, though one can adjust to it, and the film mostly recovers. I'm not sure how well this movie will hold up in a few years, but right now I will happily give it an A-.
Not bad. Yeah, I thought it was incredibly clever, and what it has going for it that about 99% of animated films can't duplicate, at least for an original non-sequel type movie, is the name recognition of Legos. I mean, it's something that just about every single person in this country and probably the world, young or old, knows about. Mm-hmm. And if the building toys are somehow unfamiliar, if you've been under a rock, you've got Batman, Superman, Abraham Lincoln, Shaquille O'Neal. You've got a whole host of famous people and animated characters to deal with. And that will no doubt bring audiences in droves, which, like I said, it did this weekend. But that also sets the bar very high. It has to have a good story that holds interest and a great sense of humor. And luckily, the Lego Movie has both, and great voice casting to boot. One of the best collectives that we've seen in recent years, especially Liam Neeson, Elizabeth Banks, Chris Pratt, and Will Arnett, who, as Batman, has some of the absolutely funniest lines. Like many great animated films, kids and adults will appreciate the Lego Movie for different reasons, and also appreciate the humor on two separate levels, which Joe kind of mentioned. And I really did especially like the action sequences that they sort of rip off of like every action movie, like a Fast and the Furious, and I thought that was really well done. But that being said, it tries to do a little too much all at once and is a little too in your face because of it. In fact, the jokes come so quickly that some go right by because you're laughing at the last one and you miss out. Some of the bits get a little bit tired after a while too. The twist at the end is emotional and creative, and Joe sort of spoke to this. But for me, it came off largely as a long-form commercial for Legos. Of course, with movies like The Internship and Jobs out there, I've certainly seen much worse written movies as advertisements. And I'm going to leave the Lego Movie with a B+. And I will be taking my nephew to see this within the next 2 weeks, so I'll see it again. A lot of times with animated features, the key really is how well it holds up. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that, it's questionable whether it'll still retain the same kind of air in a few years.
Well,
we'll see.
It's so enveloped in pop culture that
it really is.
I'm worried it could become dated in a decade or two. I'm not really sure.
What I liked about it, though, and we'll go to Justin in a minute, but what I did like in terms of that is a lot of the pop culture references weren't necessarily specific to the here and now. Mm-hmm. Like the Where Is My Pants show that they keep referring to, I think could be attributed to really any like dumb reality show or stupid sitcom, and they're never going away. Mm-hmm. I thought that was one of the pop culture references that sort of stands up.
I do agree it was mostly general enough that I don't think it will die up, but there were some little things like the Harry Potter phase was pretty big for a while, and they had a little Dumbledore joke in there.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, I feel like that's more funny now because Harry Potter is still kind of embedded in our consciousness, whereas 20 years from now, people might like Harry Potter, but who knows if they'll get why that's funny.
Albeit, I still thought the jokes were relatively approachable. I think some might get a little dated, but I don't think it will contaminate the entire movie.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I don't really think so, but I'm not sure.
And most of the famous Legos that they used, like other than the Dumbledore one you mentioned, are pretty classic. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, Michelangelo, Cleopatra, Batman, obviously. Justin, what did you think of the Lego Movie?
Thank you, Dan. Directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller have proven over the past few years that they can appeal to kids, as evident in Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. as well as adults with 21 Jump Street and the upcoming sequel. But this is truly their crowning achievement. Aside from one of the most unique animation styles I have ever seen, seamlessly merging photorealism with CGI to give it a sort of stop-motion quality, the film has a constantly entertaining storyline and some truly hilarious performances from a number of people. However, alongside this, the film packs an important message about making a difference, and how it's handled in contrast to other films is rather poignant. The only minor issue that I have with this film is that the action can get a little frenetic, and particularly during the first act, because its wild visuals in the background can get a little distracting. That said, the Lego Movie is great fun for children and adults, and for older audiences, bound to stir nostalgia. And for that, I give it an A- as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the stop motion thing was pretty cool. Like, the way they made the Legos move as they would move, in a child's hand or whatever is pretty cool. However, I didn't think the 3D really added anything. Did you guys think the 3D was anything special?
Only once.
Yeah, there was one time where something was shooting out.
Yes, it was the one laser beam came out, and I was like, oh!
That was literally it.
That was the only time I noticed it.
Yeah,
I
agree.
mean, there were a couple, you have to look, near and far to see them.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that, though, because until you mentioned that again, I forgot I saw it in 3D.
I did, too.
Yeah.
Until those lasers came out, I forgot that... I mean, because I wear glasses normally, so I don't really know that I'm wearing 3D glasses.
It's I thought the animation was amazing.
Yes, it was.
But I do agree. I honestly didn't notice 3D much at all.
Yeah.
Though I have to ask you guys, I really didn't know. Was there any stop motion in the movie, or was it all just really well done?
No,
it just was made to look like that.
Yep. It was like I said, photorealism merged with CGI.
Okay, because I figured that with photorealism, it kind of fooled me, because I really did think it had to be mostly just traditional CG animation, but I thought that they did such a good job replicating that. I really thought there were legitimate stop motion sequences in the movie.
They absolutely killed it.
That was great. No,
Yeah.
I saw the film knowing what the twist was at the end.
Oh.
Because I had seen it throughout the weekend at the theater. Mm-hmm. And so I saw it from the perspective of knowing everything that was happening. How did you think? I mean, Joe, you mentioned it was sort of handled a little awkwardly and took some getting used to.
As I said, it was a really good twist, and I thought it was profound. I mean, you could say deep man. I mean, there was some little, kind of man upstairs. There was some whole crossing of dimensions, meeting God metaphors type there, which I thought was really heavy and profound and fairly subtle for a kid's movie. So I was really impressed that they did that, because there were some really important questions being asked there. But like I said, because it was so, mind-bending, it did take a few minutes for me to kind of get acquainted with it. But once I did, and once we saw the kind of parallel they were going for, I thought it was actually really masterful. I really did.
And I think the capper joke at the very, very end of the movie, I thought was just hilarious and really kind of made it less commercially.
Well, it is definitely a commercialized movie, but it was done so well and so adequately. They really were trying to make a good movie, not just sell their toys. And I think that they really captured what it means to be a kid.
Well, like I said, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of different ways to make a commercialized type of movie. I mean, it's called the Lego Movie, so obviously they're going to run to the bank with, making toys, for Emmett, and making the worlds, making Lego packages for the worlds that we see in this movie. That's sort of a foregone conclusion.
That's true.
But you're right. It's in the handling of how it's written, because they could have just thrown together a movie and kids would have come out to see it.
They were confident in that. They even make little jokes about it. We have so much Lego stuff. They knew that they could easily get away with that. But like I said, the people behind it cared so much about their audience, and I think about Legos and about all the characters and about childhood.
Well, like with Emmett, having to follow the instructions for everything. Yeah. I mean, everybody can relate to that, trying to read the Lego instructions.
And I also just liked, like I said, I just liked how really smart it was. There was a lot of little commentaries about life in there, some silly little things I think we can all get behind. I mean, the overpriced coffee thing you see in the trailers. I mean, speaks very truly, and you just kind of go with it. Yay, fitting in, and the things you do to fit in. And I think they made a legitimately really good movie here.
Yeah.
I wanted to revisit your point about the twist. I do admit that I too thought it was a little strange. I wouldn't say I thought it was as awkward as you gentlemen did. I think that was largely because I want to say about 10 minutes prior to that, there was a kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of moment that sort of hinted at maybe
foreshadowing.
Something's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I thought the twist was really well done. I thought it was emotional. I thought it took the movie to an entirely new level. I'm not entirely sure I would agree on it's advertisement-ish.
I very much thought it was.
Well, I think it's pretty heavy on the advertising, but it's not a bad thing.
Well, it's a Lego movie, as you mentioned.
Right, like I said, by its design, it's sort
supposed
of has
to be. You know, and they know it, and they run with it, and they do it well. I want to ask a question, Justin.
Go on.
Because of recent discussions we've had about previous kids' movies,
go on.
How well would you say that it utilized its world? I'm just curious.
I knew this was coming.
Because I was thinking about it, and you graded it high. So
that's fine.
What did this do slightly better than another film we discussed recently? I'm just curious, honestly.
Well, first of all, as you mentioned, they sort of jokingly said, like, okay, there are these other locations that we could do, but for the time we're not going to talk about, which I thought sort of like solved that problem. But I think in terms of like the worlds that they gave us, everything got an equal share. It was like I mentioned in my review, it's still a little frenetic because there's all this stuff going on that it can get a little distracting, but it's not overwhelming. It's just sort of like when there's action sequences, stuff can get in the way occasionally.
Gotcha.
All right, well, moving on to movie number 2 in our new release slate, and that is Labor Day. Kate Winslet has almost made a career out of playing women who fall in love with someone that society doesn't approve of, like in Titanic and The Reader, for example. Now, as Adele Wheeler, she has fallen in love with a fugitive named Frank Chambers, played by Josh Brolin, a man convicted of murder who escaped from the hospital while healing from an appendectomy. He holds up with Adele and her 13-year-old son, Henry, played by Gatlin Griffith, whom she also has sort of a weird relationship with, forcing them to take him to their house. Henry, whose deadbeat father, played by Clark Gregg, only sees him once a week, immediately takes a shining to Frank, and Adele is soon to follow. But with the police in constant search mode, how long before somebody finds out where Frank is hiding? When I first saw the previews for this, I was quite excited, especially with Jason Reitman at the helm. His first 4 directorial efforts, some of which he also wrote or co-wrote, and he wrote Labor Day as well, all received at least an A- from me, and also Winslet is one of my favorite actresses. But once Justin pointed out that it looks too much like a Nicholas Sparks adaptation to be much good, I could see exactly what he was talking about. Indeed, it is based on a Joyce Maynard novel, but certainly she doesn't have the same name recognition as Sparks. She does, however, seem to have his pattern down. Now, I'm hit or miss on Sparks myself, but unless you're a through-and-through fan of that kind of sappy love story, I'm not sure if you'll find much to enjoy in Labor Day. Although, maybe if you're a foodie, as the film is rife with bizarre food scenes, played mainly for sex. The entire movie also features awkwardly cut flashback sequences so we can find out how Frank ended up in jail in the first place. The love story, odd as it feels, actually does a few things right and held my interest, as does Henry's coming-of-age story. But it was also a weird choice to have Tobey Maguire play Henry as an adult and provide voiceovers throughout the film, since we just had a film played through Maguire's character's eyes in voiceovers a year ago with The Great Gatsby, and much better at that. So I'm going to give Labor Day a C-. Justin?
There comes a time where a reviewer honestly wants to ask a director if they were intending to prank their audiences with their overall product. It was a question I asked myself last year when I saw movie 43, and it's a question this reviewer would love to ask director Jason Reitman, who after making films like Young Adult and Up in the Air, is downright better than this. To be honest, this had a couple of interesting bits, such as the twist near the end being the prime example, but the film comes off as an all-around soap opera. Characters are poorly written and developed, and many scenes just don't make sense, including the peach pie making scene, which will soon be made iconic for all the wrong reasons. It's an absolutely pitiful excuse for a romantic drama that just narrowly escapes an F, thanks to a couple minor aspects as mentioned, and Winslet trying to keep the film alive, and I give it a D.
Oh, I didn't think it was that bad. Joe, go ahead.
I think that this movie was trying to say something about budding sexuality, but I just felt that the whole fantasy element of the perfect man Josh Brolin just kept clashing with the fact that he was still a criminal who was manipulating Kate Winslet and her son. I did like the way this movie was shot, and I liked the editing, but the story was really confused, and I lost in what was basically smut. It's well acted, for the most part, but the movie is mostly insane, stupid, or just unlikable characters. I couldn't get behind this message of the film, and the tone was just overall unpleasant for me. Whether deliberate or not, I'm not sure. Plus, the flashback sequences really got on my nerves. This movie had some good things in it, but overall, it's a movie that I should say that unless you are really, really into cheesy romance flicks, you should probably avoid, and I give Labor Day a D+.
And I do think that we all kind of agree. Those flashback scenes...
They were weird.
Were very, very weird.
I wouldn't even argue they were necessary.
I think it was necessary to find out what exactly happened with Josh Brolin's character. However, they could have done it in such a way that... Say he was just explaining to Adele what he did, and it could have been just one scene of it, and then you're done with it.
The reason why I think it confused or made everybody feel awkward, at least in this particular group, is that I felt that they, as you guys said, they could have utilized them a little better. Maybe like Josh Brolin explaining something, or had the character speak and say, "Hey, I'm Josh Brolin's character. I'm young." Because it took a couple times to do it, and I admit that occasionally having like a flashback, maybe, and a fade in of him thinking of something in the past, you would know for sure it was his flashback. But I think it took about halfway through it that you got that point. It just felt like we just had okay, we have the plot, then a flashback with no dialogue of people watching other people run in the fields, and then a couple of the same flashbacks repeated, like some woman about to give a guy a sexual favor, like twice. They use the exact same one. I'm like, okay, you just wasted about 20 seconds of film.
Yeah,
pretty much.
It was really annoying. I just didn't like that.
I didn't either. It was confusing. It took me a few times to realize that they were Frank's flashbacks. Justin was confused by it. It wasn't put together well.
No.
At all.
The flashbacks part. And the Peaches thing is, you could tell from the first preview of this movie that, they were going for the Ghost Pottery Wheel. And
it's worse than the Ghost Pottery Wheel.
The Ghost Pottery Wheel is amazing and great, and everyone loves it.
It's pretty cool scene.
It was a little cheesy, maybe. At the time, though, I don't think it was.
It's a little cheesy, but that's the point. It's supposed to be a light romance. You're gonna have some cheese.
But the Peaches thing...
Well...
It's comedy gold.
They even did, the hands on top of the hands, just like on the pottery wheel.
No, there were, like you said, there were little bits and pieces of the movie that I enjoyed. I liked what it was trying to do. But overall, it just was not fitting together very well. And by the way, I have to ask you guys, I have to reinforce this.
Go on.
Did either of you find it, some of the undertones kind of disturbing?
A little bit.
Like with her and her son?
Like when, I was
going to say, it seemed like borderline incest.
It sounded like erotic. I'm sorry. I know that she's a little anxious and possibly has some mental faculties, but when she had that conversation really in depth with, they tell you about how sex works, but not how about it feels and about passion, and how he was, really trying to do nice things with his mom, being a man for the week.
She obviously
really needed a man.
Has some problems emotionally and possibly mentally.
Which is fine. But I'm sorry.
That's all I can
Still
say
creepy.
for that.
The whole
I didn't say it wasn't. I said in my review that it was weird.
I just thought the undertone of the movie was just weird.
It was.
It's just very unpleasant for me.
Yeah. As I said, not for
everybody.
Not for everybody. If you love, and you mentioned this as well, Joe, if you love the Nicholas Sparks kind of sappy romances, if you're a foodie, maybe you'll find a little more than we did.
I think you might get more out of it, but I really don't think you're gonna think it's a great movie.
All right, well, next up is Vampire Academy, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
Okay. Rose Hathaway, played by Zoe Deutsch, is a half-breed protector called a Dhampir, taking care of her vampire and best friend who happens to be royalty, Lissa, played by Lucy Fry, whom has been on the run for the past year. When they get caught and sent back to St. Vladimir's Academy, a possible conspiracy involving their enemies, known as Strigoi, begins to unfold, and whether or not Lissa is safe gets called into question. The biggest issue with Vampire Academy comes from the fact that it tries so desperately to go against the overabundance of teen vampire stories by attempting to be self-conscious, but instead it ends up suffering for many of the same reasons. Deutsch, as the protagonist and narrator, is awful and ends up feeling like a bad attempt at imitating the snark from Juno's scribe Diablo Cody. It doesn't help that none of the supporting cast are any better or likable, and as such the film drags on aimlessly, desperately trying to find more mediocre ways to make their supposed mystery interesting. aside from that, the visual effects are weak and the action sequences are all too brief to be any form of fun. Overall, Vampire Academy is an awful film that plays out like a bad TV pilot, and I give it an F that could very well end up on my worst of 2014.
I have a question that I think will become a staple of Season 2 here on the show.
Oh, no.
Better or worse than Hercules?
Worse, unquestionably.
Okay. From the opening scene of Vampire Academy, featuring the very tired Bad Girls by MIA, which was beat to death last year in both Melissa McCarthy hits, Identity Thief and The Heat, you get the feeling that originality will be at an absolute minimum in this film, and it surely is. In ads, it's been touted as including people involved with high school classics Mean Girls and Heathers. Sadly, not one good thing about either of those movies is included here. As Justin mentioned, it more evokes the worst qualities of Diablo Cody-written movies, that being the "we're so trendy" dialogue, which if you thought was overdone in Juno, you'll be drowning in it here. They even found a star with the same voice and look as Ellen Page, that being Zoe Deutsch. The acting is atrocious, the story unappealing, and the script a joke. I'm not sure when Hollywood will realize that to find the next Twilight or Hunger Games franchise, you can't just adapt any young adult book series, you have to have some sort of script. Now, I've never read the Vampire Academy books, but for somebody to have thought it was a good idea to film it, it's got to be a better read than it is to watch. And I also give Vampire Academy an F, and I would say slightly better than Hercules. Joe?
Now I realized why I thought she looked like the girl from Juno. I thought that was Ellen Page for a second, but I was like, it couldn't be. It couldn't be, but she looks and sounds exactly like her.
They casted her to look exactly like her.
That was so weird, because I was like, okay, I know this isn't the same actress, but it looks sound like that she's doing the exact same thing. I'm glad you guys brought that up, because I kept thinking, that just seems really odd. Vampire Academy. I thought the main character of this film was trying to be charming, but it seemed that she never stopped to actually be serious. Her attitude was really just annoying to me, and half the time I wanted to punch her in the face. She does have a few good moments, but the actress can't do much with horrible dialogue. I think this movie thought it was trying to be clever, and some sort of semi-parody of teen fantasy. Still, it really just comes off as bad fan fiction, except unlike I, Frankenstein, which seemed to at least have some originality in it, this one was almost entirely shallow. With one or two exceptions, the acting is horrible, the plot is executed in the most boring, spoon-fed way possible, and the plot twist is, of course, no surprise at all. The sad thing is, this movie seems to think that a sequel is possible. I doubt it. The best thing about this film was a cover of Bela Lugosi's Dead in the end credits, which... They're laughing because I like goth punk of the 80s, which I liked better than the whole film. Vampire Academy gets an F, but that song was probably like a B+, A-.
Not bad. I guess a better question for this particular movie is better or worse than The Host, which we all had in our bottom 10 of last year. I would say this is worse than The Host.
I think it's slightly better than The Host, and actually quite a bit better than Hercules for me. Because while the Ellen Page snarkiness was obviously, complete copy, at least it kind of kept me interested because it was kind of a fond memory of better things.
Well, let me start off by saying I love the question. When we saw The Host, we were the only ones in the theater, and we were making fun of it mercilessly. So I would argue...
Ooh.
It is hilariously awful, but I think The Host at least had a more cohesive story.
Yeah.
It wasn't much good, and it was not acted well, but the story on the whole, I think, was better, and maybe a little more original.
I'll give you that.
I don't know.
So, based on that criteria, I would probably say worse.
Okay. Something to look forward to probably in our worst of the year. All right, well, that wraps up our new releases, but we'll move into our home media moment now, and that is a movie new to DVD. And this week, that is CBGB. CBGB is a comedic film about the history of the legendary New York punk and alternative club of the same name, started by Hilly Crystal, played here by Alan Rickman, who owned the club its entire 33-year history until it closed in 2006 over a rent dispute. Lots of famous singers and bands were introduced to the world at CBGB, including, but certainly not limited to, the Ramones, Talking Heads, Blondie, Iggy Pop, the Dead Boys, and the club also featured the American debut of The Police. And all acts I mentioned are represented in this film by people like Malin Ackerman, Taylor Hawkins of the Foo Fighters, and Harry Potter star Rupert Grint. The actors playing the musicians try their hardest, especially Ackerman, and the music is, of course, great, but the clumsy introductions to the artists in a revolving door fashion, the bizarre comic book style of the scene changes as if we're watching Scott Pilgrim, and Rickman's absolutely pathetic American accent make this an absolutely pointless telling of a very rich story. And by everything I know about the club, it is a faithful telling, it's just gone about in a terrible way. I give CBGB a D+. Joe, you saw this one?
I did, actually. This is kind of turning out to be the punk rock podcast, I guess, because of 3 movies
With
now.
your Bauhaus mention.
Yeah, Bauhaus and Susie and the Banshees and Nick Cave later. So, wow. I love the soundtrack of this movie, and I have always found the history of punk music interesting. Sadly, this movie isn't really that appealing. Most of the acting is just kind of bland, with Alan Rickman being the most likable part of the movie, despite, as Dan mentioned, not really having much of an American accent at all. I did like the homage to this period in the process of trying to start a scene from humble beginnings. It's just that the story was put together in a rather dry way and followed characters and situations which weren't as interesting as they should have been. I also felt that this movie was both a little pretentious, but didn't really have any right to be because it was shot and edited so poorly. And I also found the comic book panel theme to be distracting and bizarre, and I honestly didn't get it. I give CBGB a D.
Justin, what'd you think?
CBGB's all about going against the grain in a true punk lifestyle, but the film is just a lifeless mess. This is largely due in part to its weak writing, which just skirts over any form of character development and or likability. Alan Rickman as Hilly Crystal is completely unlikable, despite Rickman seeming to be adamantly trying to save it, even though, as you both mentioned, his American accent is abysmal. And while it is interesting, all the popular bands that have played at the venue in the past, none serve any real purpose than to simply do their best impersonation of whatever band the actors are imitating. It's really a pity because CBGB had the potential to be a great story about an influential nightclub that's a character all its own, but instead it just completely falls on its face, and I give it a D as well.
Well, for one thing, the accent, I had to look up whether Hilly Crystal was actually American, because I thought he was. But when I was writing my review, I was like, I want to make sure that this guy is actually American, because you would never know it.
You'd make sense
from Rickman's portrayal.
If they cast him for that purpose, like, okay, he's a British guy, let's get a great British actor to do it.
Exactly. Which Alan Rickman is, usually.
Yeah.
Typically. So that's number one. But number two, I think that, like Justin said, I think we all kind of mentioned, I mean, there is a great story to be told here.
Absolutely.
And there is a documentary that came out a few years ago that the Talking Heads had a part in, but I wasn't able to find it on Netflix or Amazon. I wanted to kind of check it out. I mean, the story of CBGB is great, and like I said, they mostly get the information right so far as I know. But this is just not the way to go about it.
You know, it's funny. If he was British, it would have been interesting to work it in because obviously there was a lot of British influences that came over here. It was a big part in starting the scene in America. So that would have been cool if it was accurate.
Right.
So I think that's just bizarre casting.
But it's not.
They were like, okay, we need somebody to kind of make this bankable. We're going to get a great actor. Does it matter if he can do the American accent or not? No. Doesn't matter.
No, they can work with it.
They'll buy it.
It was just a mess. It's a shame, and hopefully, at some point they'll release maybe a more mainstream documentary about it, so people can hear the story. All right, well, let's move into our top 10, and this week that is Oscar-nominated Best Original Songs. Like I said at the top of the show, we had originally chosen to do this one last week because we had talked about the Oscar nominee Alone Yet Not Alone that got kicked out of the Best Song race. But upon hearing the news of Philip Seymour Hoffman's death, we decided to go with the favorite Hoffman performances. So we're going to do the top 10 Oscar-nominated songs this week. And with that, we're going to start with Joe.
All right, how are we doing this?
Let's do 10 through 2.
All right, 10
and then we'll all reveal our number ones.
Sounds good. Well, most of mine are actually, I think, winners, and a lot of them are actually Disney because I guess I really like a lot of Disney songs. They stuck out to me the most. My number 10 in that vein is Under the Sea from Little Mermaid. I will be honest, I think in terms of music from this movie, it does have a lot of great tunes for sure. But for some reason, this one was just always really catchy and stuck out to me more than any others. Number 9 is actually one of my favorites from a movie we have talked about previously, and that is Chim Chim Cheree from Mary Poppins. I mean,
great.
What a great atmospheric piece that kind of captures the tone of a classic film. Number 8 will probably make Dan happy, and that's Somewhere Over the Rainbow from Wizard of Oz. I mean, I don't think you could have a top 10 list without that. Number 7 is Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Lion King. I mean, great romance song. Pretty cheesy, but hey, it's hard not to like. Also, Go the Distance from Hercules, which was not a winner, but a nominee, is one that I think people don't talk about very much, but I always really liked it. I always enjoyed the movie and that song. I liked the message behind it. May It Be from Fellowship of the Rings. I'm a big Enya fan. I think she's got a great voice, and this song really captured that whole mystical feel that she kind of interwove with a lot of those other films. I thought that was a great pick for Tolkien's universe.
That's your number 5.
That's my number 5. Number 4 is Accidentally in Love from Shrek 2. I just love this song. I just can't stop. It's really amazing. It's so simple, and you'd think it'd be out of place, but it's just great. And another great thing about Shrek 2. Number 3 is Blame Canada from the South Park movie. Easily my favorite song from that movie. It's so ironically hilarious. I mean, the whole concept for that is great, and I think that kind of holds the movie together. And number 2 is very recent. That's Let It Go from Frozen, because every time I come by a theater check in the Regal where we work, I have to stop whenever that song's on. I have to watch it quick. It hypnotizes me every time. It's just a fantastic song, and it's going to go down as one of the greats for sure.
Nice. I feel the same when I'm working. If I hear "Love Is an Open Door," my favorite song from Frozen.
It's another great one too.
Always gotta stop in there.
That's one of 3 that are mandatories for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, for my top 10, I actually chose winners only, just because coming from a radio background, I didn't want to sift through knowing almost all of these songs to try and narrow it down to a top 10. So I just went with winners. But "Accidentally in Love" is a great song. I'm glad you put that on your list.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't win, of course. And one that you mentioned, Elton John, "Can You Feel the Love Tonight," did win. My personal favorite was a nominee, and that is "Circle of Life."
Oh.
Love that song. It's one of my favorite Elton John songs, actually.
That's another great one.
So if that had won, I'm sure we would have seen that on my list.
Definitely.
But my number 10 is Bruce Springsteen with "Streets of Philadelphia" from Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Great choice.
Thank you. Yeah, great song. I mean, it was a pretty much foregone conclusion at the time that he was going to win the Oscar for this, and it is well-deserved. My only real gripe about it is that in the video, he is walking the streets of New Jersey with Philadelphia in the background. Not sure why that was, but a really great song and fits very, very well with the movie. My number 9 is Celine Dion, "My Heart Will Go On" from Titanic. Obviously, I love the movie Titanic. We've discussed that many times, but this is a song that gets played throughout the movie, never gets old, and I was working at the time at an adult contemporary radio station when the song was out, so I played it usually about 5 or 6 times per shift, and it still never got old for me. I think it's very well written, very well sung. You can disagree, but I think it's a great song.
I actually did consider putting it on the list.
It's a classic.
I saw Titanic when it came out in 1997. I heard the song, I heard it again, I was thinking the entire time, please stop playing this song. And it was in my head for at least the next 3 days, and I vowed I would never watch this movie again because, yes, I thought it was fantastic, but that song was driving me crazy.
You watched Titanic when you were 7?
I was really big into Titanic when I was a kid, so my dad said it was okay. When I finally meet Dan, Titanic gets re-released. I watch
several times in a month.
Several times in a month. I think I was with you for...
I think 3 of them.
3 of them. Thank you. I still think the song gets a little overplayed, but, I mean, it's gotten a little bit better with age.
A classic is a classic. It's a well-written song, and obviously she's a great singer. So, enough said on that. My number 8 is Donna Summer with "Last Dance." Now, until this list came up, I didn't actually realize that this song was from a film and that it actually won an Oscar. It's from a movie called Thank God It's Friday from 1978. But if you're a disco fan or a club fan, "Last Dance" is an absolute staple, and it's just a great song. My number 7 is Chim Chimmery from Mary Poppins, written by the Sherman Brothers, as we learned in Saving Mr. Banks. Now, this is not my favorite song from Mary Poppins, which would be Tuppence a Bag. But it certainly does set the stage very well. And like My Heart Will Go On, it's a song that kind of plays throughout the movie, from scene to scene, and still never gets old. Number 6 is Baby It's Cold Outside. Now, this is a song that I also did not quite realize was from a movie, but it won the Best Original Song Oscar in 1949 for a movie called Neptune's Daughter. Now, it was originally sung in the film by Ricardo Montalban and Esther Williams, but Baby It's Cold Outside over the years has become one of my absolute favorite holiday songs, besting out another Best Original Song winner, which is White Christmas. I just love hearing Baby It's Cold Outside every year, really regardless of even who sings it, because there's so many different versions. My number 5 is Eminem's Lose Yourself from 8 Mile, a very well-deserved win, and just a really good movie, actually, if you have not seen it. Number 4, Bill Medley and Jennifer Warnes with I've Had the Time of My Life from Dirty Dancing, 1987. Here's another song that was on the radio all the time when I was a kid, and it's another one that just never ever got old for me. I finally saw Dirty Dancing for the first time about a month ago, and it made me like the song even that much more. Number 3 is an old standard, The Way You Look Tonight. It's sung in the movie by Frank Sinatra, and the movie I'm talking about is Swing Time from 1936. This song is just absolutely wonderful. I've always said that I wanted it played at my wedding. Not necessarily the Frank Sinatra version. I prefer the Harry Connick Jr. version, but it's just a great song all the way around. And my number 2 is Judy Garland singing Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz. I think Joe said it best. There's no best song top 10 that could be complete without adding this one onto the list. Justin?
Well, first of all, Dan, I have to give you a big thanks on this. This was a really hard list for me to do because I realized before we did it, there are a lot I've heard of, there are a lot I need to look at, but I mean, the hard work paid off, and I thought it was a really well-balanced list, and I hope you both enjoy it.
Good.
Nice.
All right, number 10 is quite possibly going to be a controversial decision, and that is Zippity Doo Dah from Song of the South. Admittedly, Song of the South has gone down in history as a racist film, but the song is incredibly catchy and memorable. And despite the film being somewhat swept away from existence, probably a good thing, the song has still stood the test of time and still holds somewhat of a presence, even in the Disney community. It's on Splash Mountain, so...
I think that's a great choice. That's a great song.
Yeah, thank you. Number 9 is Gonna Fly Now from Rocky. What can I say? The song's iconic. I think the instrumental score and minimal singing, which I'd say is probably my least favorite part about the song, but it's still just a great uplifting beat, and its iconicism still holds up, and I'm sure we're probably going to see it again when the Creed spin-off comes out in the not-too-distant future. Number 8 is Lose Yourself from 8 Mile. It's one of the few rap songs to ever be up for an Oscar, and deservedly so. The lyrics are great and relatable, particularly in the matter of stage fright. As such, it's an edgy and intense song that's perfect for being up for an Academy Award. Number 7 is Jai-Ho from Slumdog Millionaire. It's one of the most memorable song and dance numbers of the 2000s, and I think it's a great way to wrap up the movie. It's a fantastic homage to Bollywood, and it's such an energetic tune that it just created a great presence nationally. I believe shortly after it came out, the Pussycat Dolls covered it, even though I personally thought their version was abysmal.
Well, I was going to say that's actually why I didn't include it on my list, because I love the Pussycat Dolls version. I like the original as well, and it fits great with the movie, but since obviously the Pussycat Dolls version wasn't the one that won the Oscar, I didn't put it on. But that is a very good song.
Number 6, I'm sure Dan will be happy about this, and Joe probably as well, Chim Chim Cheree from Mary Poppins.
Wow, we got a winner.
Aside from being one of the memorable songs of the film, it really helps the audience understand the character of Bert, and hits home the central message of the film that money does not necessarily bring home happiness. And let's all be honest, we all wanted to become chimney sweeps after this song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And then we didn't once we saw Step in Time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yikes.
Good dance number, just runs on entirely too. Number 5, Be Our Guest from Beauty and the Beast.
Nice.
Amidst a plethora of great 90s Disney songs, this is easily one of the best. It just creates a great, welcoming, and whimsical atmosphere that sticks with one well after the film is over. And while it is a great song, it's really at its best when you have the animation associated with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm surprised that the title track to Beauty and the Beast won over Be Our Guest, because I think Be Our Guest is a better song also.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
I think it's probably the best one.
Yeah.
Number 4 is Whatever Will Be, Que Sera, Sera, from the 1956 The Man Who Knew Too Much. Aside from embracing a personal philosophy of mine, it's a great song. Admittedly, I'm not as thrilled about Doris Day singing it, but it does have great staying power that has lived on in much more current films, notably during an absolutely chilling scene in Mary and Max, which we discussed last week. Mm-hmm. And number 3 is Live and Let Die from the James Bond film of the same name.
Could it be?
One of the best James Bond songs. Unfortunately, the film was not as good. It has great rock flair instead of overly familiar borderline lounge singer tunes. Though, unfortunately, overplay everywhere and everything does hurt it. We saw it earlier last year with American Hustle.
Yeah, it's true.
I loved it.
But
I don't think that song ever gets old. It's one of my favorite McCartney songs. And a good Guns N' Roses cover as well.
Yeah, actually.
much like the Pussycat Dolls cover, was not crazy about that one either. But I think it's... I
well,
think,
the Pussycat Dolls one was with him, though. It wasn't a cover.
Let's say collaboration.
They just added Pussycat Doll melodies to his beats.
which I have so many problems with, I don't even want to start.
You know what?
And number 2, Cheek to Cheek from Top Hat. Almost any nominated Astaire and Rogers song is worthy of being on this list, but this is truly one of the best. Aside from great singing, they also incorporate great dancing, which is even more impressive. While Ginger Rogers doesn't have as much to do in this one in contrast to some of the other ones, such as Roberta, her chemistry with Astaire on the dance floor has never been better.
Great list.
Thank you.
Joe?
Well, my number 1 is a song that you both mentioned, and that is Lose Yourself from 8 Mile. And I think that I might be a little biased because I'm a big Eminem fan, and I think when I heard this song and I saw the movie, I was like really getting into his stuff, and I really do think he's a very, very talented musician, and I really liked the message of this film, and I really, as you guys said, it's an excellent film, and I think that the song really complements that, and it really captures this sense of desperation as well as just hard work and grittiness, and it's just a fantastic song, and I'm really glad that it is one of the few rap songs to actually get that kind of a win. So
it fits the movie very well.
It's perfect.
And obviously Eminem is still popular and making hit records. Rap, it's hard to tell if you're going to be long lasting or not. Even if he had only done maybe another couple years, Lose Yourself is such a great legacy. I mean, in 30-40 years, I don't think people will necessarily be talking about the real Slim Shady and some of his bigger hits. I think his legacy is Lose Yourself.
I think it's because it's so heavy and heart pounding, and it is very Eminem, but it also has this sweeping element to it that I think could get easy airplay on general radio. And
Still does.
And it really does. So
yeah, we played it, and we were an alternative rock station.
There you go. This is from a period when he was at his best. Like his first couple albums, I think, are really masterpieces, and you can kind of debate where he's been up and down since then, but this is the best of Eminem, the best of his time, and I think it's a great Oscar song, and it's my personal favorite.
I agree. Good choice. My number 1 is from a Disney film, but has not been mentioned yet by anyone, and that is When You Wish Upon a Star from Pinocchio. This was sung in the movie by Cliff Edwards as Jiminy Cricket, but I think it's very telling that we still hear this song every single time we watch a Disney movie, as it's in the logo, as the little, I don't know, it's not a rainbow, but like the little
star
the fairy dust,
fairy dust,
because of Pinocchio, of course, Tinkerbell, the fairy dust goes above the Magic Kingdom, and I think that says something that it's still some 70 years after its original release, the theme to the company.
That's a great choice, actually.
Thank you, Justin. What's your number 1?
Number 1 is In the Deep from Crash. I thought this was a great song in a great, albeit frequently criticized film. I thought it fit the tone of the film perfectly, and it's just so haunting and so emotional that it never ceases to give me goosebumps.
I thought the music was good in Crash, but I don't remember that particular song. That is an interesting choice.
Yeah, I remember it being performed that year at the Academy Awards, and I was blown away, to be honest with you.
Oh, wow.
All right, well, now we have the answer to what top 10 list would be complete without Over the Rainbow. It's Justin's.
Well, oh,
What
wow.
a classic.
I'm actually surprised.
I'm very surprised by that.
Well, now we have to ask the question. Why didn't it make the cut, Justin?
Let me start off by saying it is a good song. It's not a great song. Admittedly, it's iconic. It's memorable. Over the Rainbow is not bad. It's just kind of overly sentimental.
I think that kind of fits with the whole tone of the movie, though.
It does, and I mean, it's not a bad song. It's good. It's just not top 10 worthy.
I think the reason it's so beloved is that you got to remember the time it came out was like before Great Depression, World War II. I think it's supposed to be capturing, okay, somewhere over the rainbow, there could be something good to look forward to. Dorothy's whole, you know what I mean, her whole dilemma.
Agreed. And I mean, like I said, I don't hate the song.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it was one of the best.
Okay.
Well, there you go. We have our answer.
I like your top number one, Justin. That was an interesting choice.
Good list all around, I think.
Yes.
All right, well, next up we have our triple feature, and that will include Wings of Desire, which is a listener-requested movie that we watched, and we also have Alfie, which is our Oscar nominee A to Z. First up, though, is our new classic, and that is Short Term 12. And this is actually our first repeat review on the show. We reviewed this as a new release on one of our very first shows, but we wanted Joe to see it before the Oscar special where we reveal our redone top 20s, because Justin and I both had this very high on our lists, and we wanted Joe to check it out, so that's why we're doing it for this week's new classic. Short Term 12 is a comedic drama that gives an unflinching look at America's foster care system. Short Term focuses on a care facility in which children live for ideally no more than 12 months, but some stay for years, and at the helm is Grace, played wonderfully by Brie Larson, and her boyfriend, who also works there, Mason, played by John Gallagher Jr. One of the kids is about to turn 18, Marcus, played by newcomer Keith Stanfield, but doesn't want to leave, and at the same time a brusque new girl enters the facility, Jaden, played by bad teachers Caitlin Dever, who Grace bonds with after breaking Jaden's exterior down, and we eventually learn why she's in the facility to begin with, and why Grace feels that bond. Short Term 12 is without a doubt one of the best films of 2013, and was such a small indie, it never really had a shot at Oscar contention, but it definitely should have. This is Destin Daniel Creighton's second feature-length film, the first one being even smaller than this. It's equal parts heart-wrenching drama and funny slice-of-life character study. Though you feel bad for the kids for being in there in the first place, it's such a comfort to see how well they're cared for by the staff of Short Term that it never veers too far into the realm of pity. It's written and directed very, very well, and Justin and I both recommended this very enthusiastically, like I mentioned during our earlier review of this movie. Now that it's out on DVD and available to a wide audience, please give Short Term a go if you have not seen it yet. It gets an A+ from me. Joe, I'd like to hear from you as the newcomer to this film and what you thought of Short Term.
Okay. I have to agree with you. I think Brie Larson was fantastic. I don't know if I've seen her in anything else.
Yes, you have.
Have
Scott
I?
Pilgrim. She played Kim.
Did she?
She did.
She was like unrecognizable to me. Wow.
She's been in a few things.
She's a good actress then. Wow. I completely missed that. Yeah, I have seen her before, and I was impressed again. This movie tackles some very sensitive material dealing with struggling teens and their caretakers. I think the strongest aspect of this film is the honesty in which it brings out its material and the very strong performances from all the actors. This really brings out the very human nature of this tale. The writing for each of the characters is extremely believable to the point it can be heartwarming, tragic, or even disturbing. There really isn't too much about this film I can really say I disliked. I will admit that some of the actions of the main character didn't strike me as completely realistic or necessarily moral, though the situations were complicated as life often is, so I can't really fault the film for that too much. I also thought that the characters were all really great, and I wish that they would have taken a little more time to expand on them all. I could really have done with another half an hour or so. Other than that, I really enjoyed this well-made film. I give Short Term 12 an A.
Nice. Justin, we know you're a fan.
Short Term 12 is a film that embodies what I love about independent cinema when it's at its best. The product is raw yet realistic, and while there may be some familiar faces, the end result is completely out of what may have been seen before. While I've mentioned before in the show how much I was impressed with Larson's performance as Grace, the ensemble cast, particularly Keith Stanfield as older boy Marcus, Caitlin Dever as the haunted Jaden, and Rami Malek as new recruit Nate, just keeps the film feeling authentic and human. It's unbelievably dark and crushing at times, particularly during one sequence near the end of the second act with Jaden, but it offers a fair amount of optimism and humor without being overly cliche. It's a film that did not get nearly enough recognition this year, and that is an absolute shame. Short Term 12 still stands for me at an A+.
I'm glad that this was our first repeat, because obviously with the new classic slot and us reviewing, some 200 new releases a year, obviously we're going to have, a fair amount of repeats and callbacks on the new classic slot. But it's really great to have this be the first one. Because it's such a good movie that needs to be discovered. Mm-hmm. Entertainment Weekly was a very, very big supporter of it. Hopefully that, got a few people to go see it. Joe, I liked that you mentioned that you could use some more time with these characters, because of almost all of the movies that we saw in 2013, I really thought Short Term 12 could very easily be a TV show. I would love to see, especially with Brie Larson and her boyfriend sort of at the helm, and just to see these kids' lives go from week to week, and I think it would be really interesting.
It actually does sound like a concept for a pilot, because the whole setup for it did seem like an episode of a TV show.
Yeah.
That is a good point, yes. I could definitely see that. I think that's one thing I really wanted, is that I thought the characters were presented as being very interesting, but we got so little time with most of them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it really only focused on 3 or 4 of the kids, maybe.
And really only one.
And really only 2. I mean, Marcus and Jaden.
Yeah, and I think that Jaden...
the little red-haired kid a little bit.
Like, I wanted more
Lewis a little bit. But that was really about it.
Yeah, that's true, and I thought that they could have balanced that out maybe a little better. I do understand that there was one main focus, but I felt like I could have had more.
But yeah, I was totally thinking the same thing on the second go round.
Yeah, it didn't really hit me until we just watched it, because I loved seeing it again, and it was a shame that it's only an hour and a half movie.
They're great characters.
Yeah, they really are. They're very well written. All right, up next we have our old classic, and this was chosen by listener Matt, something new that we'll be doing on the show once a month. We have the old classic slot, which we all 3 pick in a round-robin sort of way. We're going to have one from Joe for next week's show. But that 4th slot of every month is going to be for you guys, the listeners. So let us know whatever you'd like us to watch. The only 2 rules on old classics are it must be more than 2 years old, and you must genuinely like it. So we're going to talk about Wings of Desire now, and Joe's going to have that for us.
All right. Wings of Desire, or Der Himmel über Berlin, is a 1987 German/French romantic fantasy directed by Wim Wenders. The film is about 2 invisible, immortal angels named Damiel and Cassiel who wander and observe the human populace of Berlin. They listen to their thoughts and help them when they are feeling overcome by thoughts of depression. Many of the other people seem rather isolated and estranged from their loved ones, despite the dense population of the city. One of the angels, named Damiel, played by Bruno Ganz, longs to break free from his eternal observatory job and become mortal so that he can have the human experience, including physical sensation and the thrill of mortality. This is further motivated when he falls in love with a lonely trapeze artist. After much time observing and becoming fed up with this reason for existing, Damiel decides to pursue a new course and become human. Meanwhile, Cassiel is unable to prevent a man from committing suicide and is left haunted by it. There is also a subplot about Peter Falk as a film star doing a movie about Berlin's Nazi roots, with a little twist involved. This film is an interesting experience to be sure. It is considered to be a great artistic piece by many, and I can see why. The movie utilizes black and white photography to create a somber tone reflecting the angel's existence for much of the film. The cinematography is grand, with long sweeping shots which enhance the beauty and grittiness of the city. The movie also has some very blatant philosophical questions asked throughout the film, tackling difficult and thought-provoking subject matter about humanity's very existence. I admire the atmosphere of this film and the ideas it tries to convey. However, in terms of actual plot, there really isn't much to move the movie's story forward, leaving me to think that this might have functioned better if it were a 20-minute short film. Within the first 5 minutes or so, Damiel's motivations and desires are made clear, and the audience knows what action he wants to take. Still, it takes nearly 90 minutes into this 2-hour runtime for any major action to take place. Even when he does become human, he only experiences some of the basic pleasures and pains before seeming completely satisfied, which seems kind of unrealistic, honestly. The romance itself also seems more metaphorical than real. While ideally beautiful, realistically it's somewhat underdeveloped. While I do admire the style of the film, as we take many brief vignettes into the minds of everyday people, I feel that we get to the point about half an hour in. If the director wanted to keep going down this path, I feel that he could have at least mixed up his technique, because after about a half an hour of the movie, the story honestly becomes mostly repetitive. Peter Falk's subplot honestly seemed distracting and didn't really fit with the rest of the movie. Still, the atmosphere was strong and the cinematography beautiful, and some big ideas were tackled. It just went on way too long. I give Wings of Desire a B-.
Justin, what'd you think?
Like many in art film, Wings of Desire has many interesting ideas, but feels that it's necessary to cram them all into one gigantic film over 2 hours, with little narrative to hold them through. These themes range from possibly satirizing pop culture, through, as Joe mentioned, the Peter Falk as a seemingly ignorant American in Germany, and the somewhat odd way that the film concludes, to looking into the human condition itself through immortal angels. Both of these themes could have made for a fantastic film had they decided to focus on one or the other, but sadly it just seems to come off as episodic. Characters come and go quickly, and it's hard to get overly attached to anyone in particular. That said, the small but noticeable dramatic beats are interesting, such as how Falk's character gradually impacts his story, and the film from a cinematography standpoint is absolutely exceptional. And I give it a C+, that, much like most art films, could be raised higher upon rewatches and or reflection.
I agree with that.
Well, this film did something that I didn't know could be done. It made me think more of the horrible Nicolas Cage movie City of Angels, which is based on this film. Experimental films are absolutely one of my least favorite things. Now, I'm a big believer in directors trying new things, being as artsy as they want, but in my opinion, they should be done mostly in short films, not in 2-hour features that will largely appeal on the grand scale only to film snobs. Now, Joe even mentioned that it might have been better served as a 20 or 30 minute film, and I would definitely agree with that. You kept pointing out, Joe, while we were watching it, that I really was trying. And I wanted to give this film the benefit of the doubt, but in basically proving my theory, its artiness wears very thin after about a half hour. The narrations that don't ever end, the experimental shots, the Peter Falk storyline that seems a bit of a misstep. On a basic level, the story is fine, which is why it lent itself to the American adaptation over a decade later. But as I already stated, I didn't really care much for that one either, but that probably has more to do with Cage's presence than anything else. I can definitely appreciate what Wenders is trying to do, and there's certainly some interesting things here, and you guys both mentioned the cinematography is gorgeous, but it just isn't enough to sustain a 2-hour film. And I give Wings of Desire a C-.
It's not as bad as I was expecting, actually.
I'm trying to be a little bit more
open-minded
with the artiness thing. But it's funny. I mean, I felt pretty much, I think, how you felt about it. Everything you said I agreed with, but I guess maybe for the more experimental aspects, you gave it a higher grade.
I really like heavy atmosphere, and I like experimental shots, and I believe a film can be experimental and it can be a little more artsy and still have an impact without necessarily being always traditionally a narrative.
Not to mention one of your favorite filmmakers is quite possibly the master of experimental, so...
Yeah.
David Lynch.
Though, dare we say.
That's true. Though, it's with David Lynch, I think even Justin could speak to this. Okay, compare this film, Justin. Would you say this is really like David Lynch?
No, I'm not saying all experimental films I like, but it's still experimental.
I'm just saying, like, I guess I like David Lynch because I like the surreal elements of his film, and I like artistic films that have something at least interestingly visual going on. Mm-hmm. And David Lynch usually has a lot of that. Like,
absolutely.
Like, it doesn't bore you. I think a lot of artsy films, like, I haven't seen his films, but what I've seen, I believe it's Malick. Yes. Like these long shots of just, I don't know, like scenery and people just kind of interacting. Like, I don't know. I feel like that would bore me.
It's awful.
And I just, like with this film, I thought that something about the way it was conveying its shots and its editing, and I just really liked the tone of it a lot. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's what kind of drew me into it. And I will admit this is actually more aligned with artsy films that I normally don't like, but I think I like the general idea of the story, which I thought was unique. And I really liked the ideas it was trying to explore.
I like the general idea of the story, as I mentioned, but the execution of it was so pompous and long-winded.
Did you think it was pretentious?
Oh, yeah.
Because
For sure.
I thought that it was trying to be honest, and I think it was asking these really heavy questions at a time. You got to remember that this was still during the Cold War.
Yeah.
We're at West Berlin. It was a grim time, I think, for a lot of people, and I think it was trying to really say something that would speak to the culture of the time, and like I said, ask some big questions that I think a lot of films don't do.
Mm-hmm.
However, I like films that make you think in a more metaphorical sense, like David Lynch does. You need to watch his films over and over again to get a different viewing. With this one, I felt like it was really obvious what the message was. You got it very soon, and he just kept kind of reinforcing over and over.
I think that's kind of my problem. Like, I would prefer, because I really did like the questions it was asking.
You did?
Yeah, I did. But for me, I guess rather than sit down and watch a pretentious 2-hour movie, I would rather just sit down at a table with a group of friends and say, hey, what if this? What if that? I would rather have the discussion than watch it being played out very long, drawn out.
But I think there are a lot of movies that have people having those conversations. I believe the Before series is kind of like that, right?
But they're having conversations in that movie. This one didn't really have a whole lot of conversations. A lot of voiceovers. So we knew what he wanted. We kind of knew where he was going with it. Mm-hmm. But he didn't really have a ton of conversations.
I thought he was talking to his buddy a couple times about some of his issues.
A little bit. Frequently. If they had just focused on a couple subjects that for them to follow around, do you think it would have helped?
My favorite scene in the movie was the scene on the train, which I thought kind of summarized the whole film well, where he goes and he listens to everybody's thoughts.
Yeah.
And they're very mixed, different thoughts, everyday things. And he's just kind of assessing, okay. And then he gets to the guy at the very end who's really depressed, and he just taps him on the shoulder. He feels better. I thought it would be interesting if they kind of went a little more intricately into each of those situations. That would have been a good way to spread it out. Like, say, focus on maybe 5 characters with different kinds of problems, their thoughts, and have the angels interact with them a little bit. Whereas instead of just listening to the thoughts of 1,000 people with 1 sentence per person, might have
because I would agree with that, and I think I would have preferred that because it did seem like he would just hear this person and then heal them, and then hear this other person and then do something to them, and it felt very, very
long-winded,
just over and over, and it felt very repetitive.
It did get repetitive after a while,
and I think we've all kind of mentioned that it could have been tightened up a little bit, and I think maybe focusing on a few people might have helped that. I think another thing that would have helped it was to sort of cut that whole part short on the whole and focus a little bit more on his life after he transforms over.
I agree.
As Joe mentioned.
I do. I agree. I thought that did come a little late. I'll be honest, though. I felt that part, because I guess there was so much time spent on the angel's perspective, the black and white, that somberness, when he does change, it's interesting something's happening, but it's so quick and underdeveloped that it doesn't have anywhere near as much of an impact as the first part did. So I was kind of I thought that part was actually less impressive because it was so rushed. Mm-hmm. I guess one last question. We've discussed how some films are kind of just basically commercials for the next film. I learned that there was actually a sequel to this one, which apparently has a lot more going on in it. And I feel like this movie was basically a long trailer for the next movie.
Yeah, which is one of Justin's least favorite things ever. So, how did you feel about that, Justin? Because it literally says "to be continued" at the end of the film.
It really did. I thought, and you said it was a parody thing. I think it was a little on the nose because it felt like we just actually got all this pacing time, a great atmosphere, but obviously very little story. And then at the very end, there's a story, and then
stay tuned.
you got to go see Far Away So Close in '93.
Yeah.
So, well, like I said, I thought that was sort of satirizing pop culture with. Obviously, the popularity of Empire Strikes Back being basically one gigantic cliffhanger, begging you to come back for the next one. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the involvement of Peter Falk, who everyone knew from Columbo. I thought it was sort of like making fun of mainstream television, and possibly films for that matter, which may work against it in terms of being pretentious. But do I kind of wish he had left it where it was? Yes. Do I fault it for him eventually coming up with a sequel? No. I mean, I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it's good or bad.
Based on Rotten Tomatoes, actually, it's hated, and this one was loved. So, but it sounded interesting. I'm not gonna lie. Willem Dafoe's in it. You get
Always a good thing.
We like him.
But yeah, mixed. But I guess we all had something good to say about it at least.
Yeah, I mean, on a basic level, the story is interesting, and like I said, I really do appreciate the questions that were asked and the thoughts being provoked, but they were provoked in about 15 minutes, and then another hour before anything interesting really happens again.
I can agree with that.
All right, and our final film is the Oscar A to Z nominee for the week, and that is Alfie. It scored 5 nominations in 1966, including Best Actor for Michael Caine, Best Supporting Actress for Vivian Merchant, Best Picture, and Best Adapted Screenplay. And Justin's going to tell us about Alfie.
All right, time to wrap this up. Alfie, played by Michael Caine, is a young womanizer who cares only about himself and charming new women. However, when one of his many lovers, Gilda, played by Julia Foster, gives birth to his son and bans Alfie from seeing him, Alfie begins to call his life habits into question. While there's no doubting that Alfie is arguably one of the most unlikable film protagonists of our Oscar nominees, I would easily argue he's one of the most complicated. Admittedly, Alfie often comes off as hedonistic, but he does occasionally try to do the right thing, particularly in some of the film's biggest dilemmas. This is one of the film's greatest strengths, having the courage to tackle very heavy subject matter for the time period, such as abortion, and facing it fearlessly through the film's titular antihero. Michael Caine keeps the film lively, and watching him break the fourth wall to offer commentary and occasionally poke fun at generic Hollywood cliches like credit sequences never ceases to get old. As such, Alfie is a film well ahead of its time, and for that, alongside a great performance from Caine, I give it a B+.
All right. Yeah, this was the very first ever PG-rated movie, which would likely be rated R today, which indeed the 2004 remake was. And Alfie throws a lot at you, and as Justin mentioned, it has some very, very ahead-of-its-time themes. It breaks the fourth wall instantly, it runs rampant with sexist humor, even calling girls it early on, and then it gets weird and serious in the last half hour. Michael Caine is note-perfect as the title character, though his famously thick Cockney accent is on full display in this, and I admit I sometimes had a hard time understanding what he was saying. The film is funny, but the long line of women in Alfie's life does get a little hard to follow. The abrupt tone change halfway through is jarring when it happens, but it works very well for the title character's arc and keeps the story interesting. Just turn Alfie off as soon as the credits start before the singing begins. I give it a B+ as well. Joe, what did you think of Alfie?
Michael Caine is a great actor, and it seems that as a young man he was doing great work for a long time. His performance is easily the best thing about this movie. I also really like the humor in the film and the breaking of the fourth wall, which was very helpful in breaking up the monotony of much of certain scenes. This timeline is a bit awkward, and it uses a sort of stream of consciousness from the main character's mind. I also really enjoyed the jazzy soundtrack, which was utilized pretty well, unlike in certain other films. However, I really didn't like the main character that much, or his exploits. It was balanced out for the most part by the wittiness of the humor, though his sexist and womanizing aspects weren't really that appealing to me. I don't think they were supposed to be, but it didn't make me want to follow this man's endeavors after a while. I did like the resolution of the film, which sort of commented that his behavior may have negative consequences. Perhaps he wasn't that bad of a guy, but I don't think he was quite likable enough for me. Other than the actor and the witty humor, I didn't really find this film that appealing. But it has some worth. I give Alfie a C+.
So not too much of a fan. Yeah, it definitely had that sexist attitude that actually we sort of talked about last week with that awkward moment. Mm-hmm. But I think he has his character arc a lot quicker. You know, Justin mentioned the baby very early on in the movie that we sort of see, and I think that starts him thinking on this path a little bit. I wish that there wasn't quite such a revolving door of women, because I wish
that got a bit confusing.
It got a bit confusing, and we understood that he was a womanizer, after the first couple that we saw. Mm-hmm. So I do think that was a little bit unnecessary, but I mean I liked that. Right away, we sort of knew who this character was. Mm-hmm. The breaking of the fourth wall did sort of break the monotony of some of the scenes. All right, well, that is going to do it for the show this week. Thanks so much for listening. You can follow us on the Facebook group. We've been posting our 5-word reviews weekly onto that, and that is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And we've got the Twitter feed up and running as well, and that's at Film Fanatics Pod. And we'll let you know whenever we put our newest episodes up for the show as well. And another way to learn about our newest episodes is to subscribe to Film Fanatics here on YouTube. And Joe's got the Merlino Boss channels as well. And you guys have something interesting that you're doing together on that, if you'd like to mention that for a second.
Oh, yes, actually, thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
As kind of a subsection of Film Fanatics, Justin and I are tackling all the Godzilla movies in preparation for the 2014 release. We're going to try and review all Godzilla and as many related films as we can up to that point, and we'll be doing quick little reviews of several movies each episode. And we're going to call it There Goes Tokyo.
So be on the lookout.
Be on the lookout.
Sounds good. Alrighty, well, thanks a lot for listening. This has been Film Fanatics. We'll see you next week. Bye!